everyone, my name is Ashley Beeson and welcome back to my channel, and today we are talking spring summer 2025. New York Fashion Week and London Fashion Week have since been completed, and so I wanted to do a combined video of just reviewing a few of the collections from each of the weeks. We'll start with New York since that's always first, and then we'll do London after that. I only picked 3 designers from each week, but obviously there were tons more. These were just the ones that I either just thought stood out the most or what I liked the most, but I thought it would be fun to do quick reviews on them. And so without further ado, let's get right into the video. First, we have the Ralph Lauren collection that I think actually started out New York Fashion Week, and they brought the collection to Bridgehampton instead of doing something in the city like it usually is. The entire collection was a combination of the regular spring summer collection and then the purple label, and then it also had the Polo Ralph Lauren collection. It was all one big giant show, which means that there was some evolution in it. Just a little bit. So the spring collection and then the purple label collection was an embodiment of coastal sophistication and simplicity. It was very Ralph Lauren, which makes sense because it's their collection, but it very much felt like Ralph Lauren. It had, you know, the blazers and the tailored suiting and even like the men's shirts for, obviously there was menswear in this, I'm not talking about menswear, but there was menswear shirts for the women, and the color palette was blues and whites kind of throughout basically the whole thing. There were some tans kind of mixed in for those two parts of the collection, and it was very classic styling and tailoring for Ralph Lauren. And then blue and the whites faded out into bold, bright colors and patterns for the Polo line at the end of the show. And the Polo line, of course, has men's, women's, and children's apparel a part of it. So there were little munchkins on the runway, just as there were regular adult models for the men's and the women's. Overall, I like the collection. I think it is exactly what they were picturing, with being a very classic and sophisticated and simple lineup of looks. There were a few looks that I didn't like the color at the end. I liked the blues and the whites and the tans and like maybe like the occasional cream. It was in the white family, but I didn't particularly love the bright stuff just because I felt like it was so much, even though it's technically a different label. Didn't love it. But all of the first stuff from the spring collection and the purple label, I thought all of that was really good. Focusing on the women's stuff, I liked the dresses, I liked the tailored pieces, I liked how they did some layering, I liked how simple it was. I mean, the men's stuff was fine, but again, I'm not going to talk about the men's stuff because I don't really focus on that stuff. Overall, I did think it was a really good American Ralph Lauren spring summer collection. One of like the first dresses in the collection, it was a kind of like an ombre effect. I loved that. I loved seeing Naomi Campbell and Christy Turlington walking down. There were a few of like the tan pieces or like the knitted dresses, that kind of stuff that I really liked. Overall, I think it's a solid collection, and I think it's a solid Ralph Lauren collection. Don't have much to complain about other than I didn't love the ending structures with the Polo label stuff. Not my favorite. I thought the kids were cute, but some of the women's stuff was fine, but I didn't like the color and like the overall kind of thing for it. But the other half of it was totally fine, and I liked most of it. So, you know, 2 out of 3 of the different labels that they did, which to me still seems like they did a good job with it. So next is Carolina Herrera, and the designer Wes Gordon took inspiration from the classic polka dot Carolina Herrera perfume bottle from 1997, and basically that inspiration of that perfume just like ran with the collection as an entirety. Obviously the collection was basically just filled with bold shapes, very limited color palettes, florals of course, which is super important to the Carolina Herrera brand. And the color palette, I liked that it was pretty limited. It might seem basic, but I think for this particular collection, the simple works, and it allows for the shape and the styling of the garments to actually breathe. And so for this one, obviously black, white, red, pink, and a blue and yellow were the only colors that we saw, and I liked that. I liked how it kind of went from like those blacks and whites, and then brought pink in, and then brought the black and white back in, and then brought the red in, and then the yellows, and then the blues. I liked how the colors were kind of just added in between all of the black and the white. The entire collection had obviously great tailoring with rather like playful and like maybe almost like whimsical kind of designs. Capri pants were very much part of it. I don't love capri pants, but they were here in this collection. There was lots of draping with knits being elevated. There were embroideries and lace that kind of just brought up simple looks, and then even like evening wear looks. It was a good mix of that structure with the tailoring, and then adding in that draping and that knit that is obviously a little bit lighter, and it's a good breakup when we see the draping and the structuring and kind of go up and down with stuff. And of course, like the evening wear too was very bold. I think even though this collection overall is a very clean, simple translation collection, I do think that it was overall pretty bold and interesting, even though it was clean storytelling in a way. I loved seeing the polka dots and sort of things. I don't usually like polka dots, but I thought this was good. I loved some of the two pieces that were there. I loved the shades of pink and red, the very bold, bright colors. I did think that there were a few looks that looked a little wonky. I'm not sure if it was like the tailoring was just a little weird, or if it just was kind of fitting interesting on the model, but there were a few that kind of looked a little frumpy and like kind of not great. There's a red dress in particular that looks a little wonky, to me at least. I liked how some of it you could see there was some vintage reference. I know there were some 80s references in there, and some of the silhouettes could be, you know, maybe drawing from like the 50s or the 60s and making them, you know, longer, a little bit more modern, that kind of thing. I like seeing those silhouettes being brought in. The big bold florals I really loved. It was definitely one of my favorite collections of New York Fashion Week for sure. I loved the black and yellow dress that Irina Shayk was modeling. Loved that one, that gown. I really do think that the creative director did a good job with having bold, clean, modern, and also somewhat historically referenced pieces within this entire collection. I really appreciated it. And I don't love all of the looks, but again, I like most of them. And I think the collection in general is super interesting and very Carolina Herrera, which obviously is the thing to do. So I thought it was overall a very good collection from that fashion house. Next we have Laquan Smith, and he is someone that is obviously a very specific type of designer. You know, his brand is very bold and very sensual design code. He very much designs for the women that are very bold and very much willing to be sensual, be a little bit sexier, be willing to flaunt and all that stuff. And he did not lose that in his collection for spring. But what I liked about this particular collection is that he seemed to have brought in a little bit more glamour and a little bit more, I'm not gonna say sophistication because it's not, but it's just bringing in a little bit more of just a glamorous side to being the woman that he designs for. The entire collection was themed around animalistic glamour, unapologetically glamorous, which meant that he brought in tons of different animal prints, but turning them into sheer textiles, whether it be, you know, snake or alligator or different types of skins that could be turned into really delicate looking textiles and fabrics, whether it be like even leather he made thinner, and chiffon is naturally obviously a very thin and light fabric. And I thought that was super interesting to see because I don't think I've ever seen anybody make leather thin and almost like opaque looking. The color palettes were pretty earthy toned, with browns and khakis and yellows, and then there were like hints of like pinks. It was very pale, kind of more neutralized pinks, and I loved that color palette. I liked seeing the warmer and not so bold the entire time color palette that he usually does. He's usually a lot bolder with colors from my memory, and I thought that this collection was a really good balance between his design aesthetic and bringing in more of that glamour, sophistication that could be portrayed to more women than just his point blank target. Throughout the entire collection there were structural moments, there was lots of layering with that really thin drapey kind of fabric, lots of see-through fabric. He did not miss his, you know, bold necklines and bold designing with cutouts and showing a lot of skin. That stuff was still very prevalent within the collection, but adding in some more kind of tailored pieces and more kind of drapier and flowier kind of pieces. It was a very diverse collection. There were lots of different types of pieces, and I appreciate that. I love seeing the prints be in those sheer fabrics. I love seeing the different chiffon kind of frilly looks, whether they were dresses or tops. There were matching sets that I loved because I love matching sets. It was a good mixture of tons of different types of textiles and fabrications, and they all came together to make one really good story, and I understood what his inspiration was with that kind of urban, jungle, sophisticated, wild kind of thing, the woman that he designs for. I definitely got it. I liked that it was that neutral color palette, and then there were like little pops of like that bright yellow and occasional blues and stuff like that. I did think that overall the collection was really strong, and it's one of my favorites of the things that I've seen Laquan Smith do, and I just liked the direction that he went for spring and bringing in more glamour, because I appreciate glamour in collections. So I thought he did a good job. And before we get into London Fashion Week, I just wanted to shout out Alaya and Off-White, because I did also really like both of those collections. I loved Alaya more than the Off-White one, but I love and appreciate what Off-White did, bringing it back to New York for the show, and then the inspiration that came from still trying to present Virgil Abloh in the collections. But Alaya was fantastic with being just so simple but so fluid, and it was absolutely amazing, and I love it. So I just needed to shout out those two collections, and we'll move right into London Fashion Week. I will be very honest in saying that London Fashion Week is probably my least favorite week of fashion month. I just have never really paid too much attention to the collections that happen in London. Sorry. But I will say that obviously I still see stuff. It's not just like something I completely ignore. But I will say that this season I was very impressed with lots of the designers and the collections that created for spring summer. But starting out, my one of three for London Fashion Week is Standing Ground. And this is Michael Stewart's first solo outing, and I loved this collection. I couldn't even, like, I loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And I think what makes this designer so interesting is that he will do simple, but it will be so striking and so interesting to look at, even if it's just a very, not basic, but a very kind of general silhouette to a gown kind of thing. And I absolutely loved it. The beaded textures, the very fluid jerseys that were used, textures to add layering and making it so much more interesting to look at, which is what I was talking about, of making it like very simple but super striking. So adding the beaded textures everywhere, which I thought was super, super interesting, and I really loved it. I loved seeing the different types of dresses. Most of them were obviously longer, but there were a few that were much shorter, and I loved that the entire collection wasn't loud, but it was amazing because there were no crazy prints. Everything was solid color, and it wasn't outlandish or anything like that. It was just amazing, and I loved seeing the different colors, from the blacks, the reds, the pinks, the blues, the more kind of earthy natural tones that were throughout it all. Each dress was different, and that beading was a part of it in different ways, and I loved it. It was a very elegant collection, and it was so interesting just to look at because it did look very like otherworldly. It kind of looked like stuff you would see in Dune almost, maybe, kind of, but I absolutely loved it. And something that I also absolutely love about Michael Stewart is that he handmade each gown. That is just all the more impressive to me, and just shows even more of the creative that he is. And I love that he made them all and put in the detail and the creative energy and all that stuff to put together this collection. And every single gown or dress, if they're not long, was absolutely amazing. But I loved the beadwork, I loved the different draping, and I just loved that it wasn't anything crazy. I liked just seeing simple colors, maybe some tiny little blocking and colors, but it was just so simple and so pretty, and I absolutely loved it. Next is Harris Reed, and he is one of those designers that is super interesting to see what he comes up with. I know that it's kind of sometimes a toss-up of whether people believe it's kind of more in the couture lane or the costumey lane. It's not generally ready to wear because some of it is not ready to wear, but it is wearable. You just kind of have to pick the right thing, or maybe, you know, kind of tweak it a little bit. But I would say that for me, I do think that he does swing a little bit costumey-er, and I don't think that's a bad thing because I think it comes up, I think because he does kind of swing a little bit more that direction in my eyes, it gives way to very interesting and very unique designs, and fashion needs that. I don't want to see the same thing every collection, every designer, every season, and so I highly appreciate what Harris Reed does because he is so out of the box, and he usually tells stories with his collections too, which also adds to that narrative. This particular collection was fully based on just fabrications. The fabrications created the collection, and this collection is a cultivation of selecting tons of vintage interior fabrics from like headboards and drapes and curtains and all that stuff, and it's old too. I know that he had used, you know, fabrics that are 200 years old for some of these garments, and I think that's absolutely fantastic because I think it's so interesting to take fabrics that aren't meant for apparel and make it apparel, and that's not an easy thing to do when the prints are always going to be very specific and the fabric is always going to be a specific density, and it could be challenging to do that. But he is also a very maximalistic with his approach to fashion, and it's also very regal, and I think that's a good combination for especially vintage drama in fashion. So him being a maximalist is right on point with what he does. This collection was a mix of vintage and modern silhouettes. It kind of, you know, depended on which one you were looking at, or it was like a very vintage visual but done in a modern way, that kind of thing. Corsetry and boning, of course, was very prevalent, and I think too the fabrics kind of gave way to that, especially when you are going for something that comes from centuries ago. You're gonna have that naturally, and so I think it was a really good fit with the fabrications and have the exposed boning and have the corseting be more interesting and not just a basic corset, or have the boning be a little bit more extra and that kind of thing, and actually create drama with those two things. And I think too with him is like, yes, again, it can be wearable, it may be costumey, but it is wearable. And I think why he is so interesting to add to that is that he isn't trying to be commercial, which means he's going to go down his creative pathway and he's not going to veer and try and make people of mass consumption like his stuff or want his stuff. He's very specific with his clientele and knowing that they will love him and he does not stray, and I really do like that. For the collection itself, I loved a ton of the pieces. I loved how dramatic they were. I loved seeing the boning pieces, the extra drama pieces. I loved just seeing the difference in textile with adding, you know, the lace here and then like the velvet here, and just intertwining those interior fabrics into very interesting and elegant apparel fashion pieces was really cool to see, and I really liked it. And I just appreciate the craft that came from this collection and came from this designer, because I thought it was interesting and I loved seeing it. So I think Harris Reed is really doing something that is super interesting to kind of break up what we see on the runways, and so I approve. It might be a tiny bit costumey, but I don't think that's a bad thing. So I think he's doing what he needs to be doing. Last from London Fashion Week is Burberry. I feel like that's kind of one of the main designers that people look out for the London Fashion Week. I will be very honest, before I even get into it, the first thing that I noticed about this collection was the staging with the kind of like turquoise backdrop and the very kind of neutral but not neutral colors, and that drew me in that was the first thing that drew me in, so I gotta get that out of the way because that was what I saw first. But anyways, this is the first collection under the new CEO Joshua Schulman, and he came from Coach, and they are trying to make Burberry more commercial, which was highly prevalent in how they went about this collection, because you can tell that it is overall much more wearable. I'm not saying that Burberry was never wearable, because it is, but you could tell that they were trying to be just a little bit more overarching with their reach on what they did down the runway. The collection was based on the feeling of lightness and summertime, and I think that came kind of in the color palettes. Again, the backdrop definitely helped enhance that with that color palette to make it feel a little bit more airy. I think that overall the collection was solid. I definitely didn't love all of it, but I did think it was pretty solid, and I liked seeing the reinvention and reinterpretation of things that are very Burberry. Obviously the check, which is signature Burberry, it wasn't at all what we are used to seeing. They brought it down into more subtle hues and saturations, and I actually really liked what they did to change it and make it a little bit more, I'm going to say modern, and I think, but it's not that modern, but it is definitely, it feels very different from the check that we normally see with Burberry. And I think, and I really liked it because I think it is just so much more neutral and so much more wearable if you just mute the colors a little bit more, and I really liked seeing it. Of course, the trench was brought in but also reworked, and it was reworked into like different types of caping and different types of outerwear. And I think for the outerwear specifically, which is also very important to Burberry, is that they reworked those outerwear staples and made them a little bit softer, not as sturdy looking, and I think that was really interesting. Obviously there's still going to be outerwear pieces, so there is going to still be structure to them, but it definitely didn't feel as heavy, which works for spring, and it definitely did carry that lightness and airiness that they were going for with the collection. Obviously this was a mixture of men's and women's, focusing on the women's. I liked seeing the different styling that they did. Again, the color palettes I think were really solid. Lilacs, light blues. There was bright orange in there too, which I don't like orange, but it was fine. And then there were also metallics. Obviously the shimmery dresses that they did throughout the collection were good. I think it did what it was supposed to do and to become a little bit more wearable. And I think for me, my biggest takeaway is seeing that check print in more neutralized colors that you can get away with in normal day everywhere, doesn't matter where you are. and I liked that. There were definitely pieces that I really loved. I kind of got bored with seeing so many like parkas, for me at least, but anytime I saw that check, I loved it. Loved it. And I think too, it still held the Burberry identity, but it definitely is swinging a little bit for that wearability and that commercial, and I don't hate it because I love that check. I do. But I do like seeing those traditional silhouettes being pulled in different directions, seeing those capes or seeing those different, the feathers being added to it, all the different things that they did to elevate their outerwear. But the check is what really did it for me. And the color palette, except for the orange because I don't like orange. But I do think that overall it's pretty solid. So I don't have much to complain about. I do like it. It is very ready to wear. So that works and that helps. But it's that check. For me, it is the check that I really liked seeing in those subtle hues to make it all the more wearable than the original check coloration. But I think they did good regardless. And the two collections that I wanted to shout out for London Fashion Week are Marquez Almeria and Alawalia. I'm not sure I said that right. I'm sorry if I didn't. But I really liked these two collections. I loved that Marquez was inspired by 17th century Dutch paintings and Baroque influences. I thought that was super interesting to look at, and the overall collection was still very Marquez, with being unfinished but finished and having rawness to it and being over the top but also being kind of simple-ish. I thought theirs was good. And then Alawalia, I loved seeing the vibrant colors and the elegant silhouettes with athletic undertones, the crochet patterns, everything. I just thought it was a super interesting collection, but I think the color is what got me the most. But I just thought that these two were also worthy of mentioning, and I didn't talk about them, but you know, they were worthy, so I wanted to add them. Overall, I do think that spring summer 2025 was solid in New York and London, and we are rolling right into Milan and then ending with Paris, obviously. So it'll be exciting to see all of those collections, and obviously Milan and Paris carry the bigger brands that everyone knows, so it'll be interesting to see all of those. But as for New York and London, I think it was solid. I thought that there was a really good overarching quality to all the designers and their inspiration behind what they chose to produce. I had my favorites, some I didn't particularly love. Obviously there are some that I did like that I didn't mention, but I think it was a solid first half to fashion month for spring. I would love to know what you guys thought. What did you think of New York Fashion Week? What did you think of London? What are your hopes for Milan and Paris? I would love to know, so drop a comment down below. And that is it. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!